Everybody, my name is Justin Alio, Senior Director of the Readiness Institute of Penn State, and welcome to the Readiness Institute Speaker Series. The Readiness Institute of Penn State is a Penn State outreach initiative enabling education, industry, and community partners to coordinate, collaborate, and create experiences for learners to achieve community and future readiness. We believe community and future readiness is achieved when all learners are able to develop the skills, attitudes, and values needed to design and lead in matters personal, professional, and public. Our monthly speaker series topic today is DEI. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now more than ever, communities and organizations are seeking clarity around the purpose, intention, and need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. To learn more about this very important topic and critical topic, I am thrilled and so excited to welcome our very special and talented guest, Karen Armstrong, Director of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity at Penn State Outreach and Online Education. Karen, how are you today?
I am fabulous. I'm so excited to be here. I was thinking about this last night and just eager to jump in. So thank you for having me. It really is an honor. I appreciate being here.
Karen, we're more excited than you for you to be here today. I'm very excited to talk about today's topic. And Karen, to start with, we would love to share with all of our learners watching today and who will be watching this recording, we'd love to share about pathways, personal and professional. So if you could take a couple minutes to explain, again, introduce yourself, how you want to be introduced, your role at Penn State, and also more importantly, your professional and personal pathway in your journey to get where you are today.
Absolutely. So just as you said, Justin, I'm Karen Armstrong. I have the privilege of being the Director of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity. And that means I really focus on belonging. How do I make sure that the communities we serve, the students we serve, the employees we serve, all know they belong here? That's why they're here, they belong. So it's an absolutely fun job because every single day my job is to help people feel better and feel secure and know that they matter. And so that's a really rewarding thing to do. I am a clinical counselor, so I'm a trained mental health counselor, and I apply that. I know that very often people feel like I don't belong, or why isn't this space for me? And part of that really has to do with knowing that their identities matter. So when we talk about diversity as a whole, and we talk about our pathways, I was passionate about helping people get to that space. And so in high school, I was a terrible student. I was absolutely awful. I hated school. And the best thing that could happen is when my dad would call me. He was a person with a disability, and he would call the office, because you had to back then, and say, you know what, I need to get my daughter out of school today. And I would come home and he would say, I'm fine. I know you don't want to be there. Like, yes, Dad, you're so right. Right. Because the way my brain worked, the way I think and process wasn't the structure of school. So I thought, I'm not smart. I can't do this. This space isn't for me. And not that, wow, that ability to stop and really process the thing or think about a thing in a longer form works for me. So, so my parents both insisted I go to college, and I did that thing. and through college, I learned that ability to process, that ability to slow things down instead of getting information really quickly and needing to learn and memorize, which I'm terrible at, that processing a thing worked better for me. And I went into broadcast journalism, where I could learn from people like Justin, and I could interview them, and I could talk to them and have a conversation rather than memorization, which still doesn't work for me today. And so I had to learn how to find something that works for my own learning style. And again, as a person who likes to delve into a topic and to process slower, journalism and exploring about people worked for me. I also learned that counseling is a lot like listening, which is a lot like journalism, right? It's important to sit and learn from people and listen to them. And I love doing that. And so I went into counseling, and it also allowed me to focus on identities. How do I help people feel affirmed in their identities? And so I identify as an African American woman, and I love being an African American woman. I'm really, really proud of that. How do I help other people recognize their identities and embrace that? I have other identities. I'm a parent of a person with a disability. I have a son with epilepsy, and that is also an identity that I love. I'm really proud of my son and love to share all about him and what that means to be a person with a disability, and to own that identity, to be proud of who you are, is something that mattered to me. So I say all of these things because it led me to the path of being a director, because I appreciate my identities. I appreciate Justin's identities. And I wanted to get to a place, Justin, where I could do this every day and I could process slower. So instead of like, let me learn and memorize and then apply, let me get to know you as a person. And I have gotten to know you, Justin, as a person, and it's been amazing. Like, I really, really enjoyed getting to know you, and then seeing, how can I help you? How can I work with you? How can I partner with you? And how can I do this at a pace that works for my brain and my personality and the things that I value? So my journey was from one who hated school and just thought I wasn't smart and wasn't for me, into finding what worked for my learning style and my personality, which is getting to know people and helping people feel affirmed. So that was kind of my journey here. Wasn't the stellar scholar that, really thrived and did so well. It was like, this is torture and I hate this. And that was for every subject, which made it even worse. And so I just had to find what worked for me.
Oh, Karen, I love that story, and it kind of affirms and ensures that it's not so much what we want to become in the future. Sometimes we ask that question, what do you want to become when you grow up? And so we try to focus on, first, who are you? Who am I? And who do you want to become? Not what do you want to become? And so hearing that from you, saying this, I want to find out how I learn more about me, what I like to do, and let my life kind of take me there, and understanding who I am first is important to you. So I was really glad to hear that. And when we talked to all of our learners at the Readiness Institute, from our high school students and beyond, we ask people to share that pathway story, because it helps them kind of take that tension all the way down, because there's no clear path from A to Z. And we talked to an assistant vice president of a bank, and he said, I went to school to be an engineer, and now I'm an assistant vice president of a bank. So again, thank you for sharing that story. It's a great story, and I'm sure a lot of people learn in that way and have similar experiences with that. And Karen, I think if people listening and watching, they kind of picked up that we're friends, we're colleagues, and we work together a lot. And everything we try to do at the Readiness Institute, we try to embed in every aspect of our programs, DEI, and you're my go-to. I love working with you, learning from you, understanding. I think we talked before about when you think you understand DEI and you're there, you're really not there, because every day it's a learning experience. So for people watching and listening right now, what's your definition of DEI, and why is it so important to know, understand, and apply to communities and organizations?
Yeah, what a really great question. And I just want to make one point, as you shared that we're friends. I encourage people to get jobs and build friendships with those you work with. It makes for great partnerships, makes life easier. But thinking about diversity in the most practical way, what are the identities that resonate with a person, right? So I shared some of my identities now. So think about sexual orientation, think about disability, think about race and ethnicity, think about socioeconomic background and experience. There's so many different things. So when we think about diversity, what are those parts of yourself that you identify? What makes you who you are? That is what builds diversity. Years ago, diversity was identified as like race and ethnicity. It's so far beyond that now. To your point about learning, it is learning about the identities of one another and embracing that and recognizing that you put all those identities at the table, you're going to get a greater outcome. You're going to get a more innovative result. And so
I love that. I love that. Diversity increases innovation. That's yes.
It's a staple. It's absolutely a staple. And so if you ever get confused about what is diversity, stop and think about identities. How do people identify? That is what yields diversity. That's what diversity is in the simplest terms. When you think about equity, how fair are we, right? So I'm now a doctoral student, and I say that because I also shared how I hate school, right? And so I'm not at that place because I found a program, again, that works with my learning style. So if I can do it, you can do it, right? But looking at something that I just did for a program, I was reading a quote by President Lyndon Johnson. And that quote was, he was talking about how we don't all start from the same place. And that's why affirmative action was needed. Because what one person starts at, another person doesn't. Where you live, access to books, access to libraries, access to a great education, access to learning opportunities outside of school are things that yield equity. And making sure that we help people start at the place that they need, rather than fairness, which is we all start at the same place because we all need the same thing. The reality is we don't all need the same thing. So when you think about equity, think, really, are we starting people with what they need? We all have different strengths and different deficits, and that's a reality for every single one of us. So giving people the exact same thing isn't equity and doesn't meet that need for where they are and what they need. So if you're ever pausing and wondering, is this equitable? Are you giving the individuals the things that they need rather than the same things across the board?
I'm glad we're recording this because that was spot perfect. So thank you. I'm going to go back and watch that again.
Well, and it's true. And it's an easy way to think about it when we get stuck on what is this. Inclusion and belonging, I put them together.
Yes.
Are we making sure that people know this is their space? So with the best of intentions, sometimes we say like, you're welcomed here, right? So if I have Justin come over my house and I say to you, Justin, great, like you're welcome to come into my house, that is my house. But if I were to go to the mall and say, Justin, you're welcome to come into the mall, you might feel like, I wasn't. I didn't know I couldn't go to the mall. Like,
oh, that's so true.
Thanks, Karen, right? And so inclusion is, this place is yours as much as it is mine. You belong here as much as I belong here, right? That this is ours as a community of people, as human beings, as people who belong in different areas and spaces with different thoughts and contributions. It is making sure that everyone knows that thing is theirs and creating an environment for everyone to know that thing. That's very different than, this is an open door and Justin, you belong in this space. I can say that in my own home, and you can say that in your own home, Justin, if I come over, because you do own that home. And so you do have to invite me in. But there are very few spaces that we actually own as ours. And inclusion is recognizing that and saying this belongs to all of us, and belonging is all of us. And you have just as much say, Justin, in what this place is and how we run it as I do. And creating an environment where you know it as much as I do. So that is, inclusion is, this is yours just as much as it is mine. And treating people like that, right? It yields, yep, it's ours. I'm included, you're included, we're all included, and we all belong in this space. So those are some simple ways to think about it. If you start thinking like, yes, you belong here, what makes you think the person wouldn't, right? Unless, of course, you own it. Again, like if I'm coming over to your house, Justin, in which case you have to invite me in because it's yours. Like I would have to invite you in to my home. but most of the other spaces where I go, I don't actually own. I would love to own them all, but I don't. And so, so, it is ours, right? You are included, I am included, it belongs to us, and we belong in that space. And we need to treat it as ours from an inclusion perspective.
Karen, thank you so much for answering that question. Everything you said was spot on. I'm hearing and reading all the time. Like, for example, the role that you have at Penn State, there's a director position for this. And I see on LinkedIn and this job, directors of diversity, inclusion, and belongingness. It's a growing job and demand because this is such an important topic. Why do you think it is so important for the people watching and listening right now? If someone's reading and says, wow, there's really a lot of director DEI positions popping up or similar titles. Yeah. Why do you think the case is now in 2021 like that, where maybe 2015 it wasn't? And what's the future kind of look like in this field that it's happening right now?
Yeah, that's
or demand of it, I guess.
Yep. That's a really great question, Justin. So a few things. Number one, it is that we as a society need to be prepared to be in a global community, right? So how restricted would it be if you couldn't know how to function in another country? I mean it from like a business perspective. If you had to go over to England, or if you had to go to Nigeria, if you had to go anywhere for work and you don't know how to function in a global society, right? And so number one, this role is here so that people can function in a global society. For those who don't travel, they're not looking at going all over the world. That doesn't mean that you won't meet people from different places and different spaces and different perspectives. And if we don't teach people how to work with others, we narrow their opportunities, we narrow business opportunities, we limit growth, we limit the economy when we're not willing to learn and embrace other perspectives. So you think about like even a local business, right? That like the local dry cleaners, right? If they're just serving that one community, that's great. And that's really, really important. But let's say they want to expand. They may need to learn how to talk to people outside of their town, the interests of those that are in the next town over, what's important to them, what matters to them. And so this role is to help people see that whether you have a globe-trotting world and you're going all over the place, or you're locally looking at this is me and my community, how do you learn to work with others? And to the question of why now, we're seeing the impact of injustice. I would say this isn't the first time we've seen that. We've seen that again and again and again. And I think we're moving to a space where we don't want injustice and we don't want people to live afraid. Sometimes when I say that, people think I just mean people of color. I mean, we don't want anybody, right? Like anyone to live afraid. And part of addressing fear is to understand sometimes we're afraid just because we're different. Yeah. And we don't understand. So,
or you think you're maybe you're not different, or you just think you're different, right?
You
may just think, I don't belong in this community because I didn't grow up in this community, even though I act, look, and dress like everybody in this community. I mean, just little things like that in people's minds, exactly the mindset.
Yep, that is exactly it. And it is okay that you and I are not exactly the same. As a matter of fact, I actually think that's why we have such a great partnership, because you are strong in areas that I need those strengths, right? And you have information I don't have that I can learn and grow from. And I know who to go to when, you've got so many skills that I can look at and say, wow, Justin, from a business perspective, can you share this with me? This is something I don't have. These are skills that make us different. And you come to me and say, there's this DEI thing. Hey, Karen, help me with that. And so we take those differences and we bring them together and we make them strengths. And sometimes we get afraid to recognize that we all don't need to be the same, that those differences are actually really great. And again, yield innovation. They yield better partnerships. They yield a better outcome. And businesses are recognizing that. And so they want people to understand that diversity, equity, inclusion, that differences are great. They are absolutely wonderful. And we can use them as a strength. And that's what they want for society. And it yields a better economic outcome. So to get down to money, like it's not usually like the purpose of what we talk about in DEI, but truthfully, businesses have learned that when you bring people together that have varied perspectives, they make more money, right? They can expand. And so DEI has grown as a profession because businesses are realizing that differences can yield a greater outcome financially. And they want more people to be able to have those benefits, right? Whether your business is big or small, whether the community you live in is big or small, there are great outcomes from learning to embrace differences that we have rather than thinking, oh no, like I don't get this person, so we can't work together. Instead, it's like, let me understand your perspective so we can work together. And they're seeing that difference. And so they're hiring people left and right, which I'm really glad about.
Yeah, good. So Karen, one of the things I picked up from that is, and I'm a true believer in this, that organizations don't partner with each other, and schools don't partner, and universities and communities, but it's the people within those organizations, within those schools, universities, communities. The people partner with the people in those organizations. So the more we understand the people within those organizations and can communicate with them, collaborate, the greater success. So that's amazing. So I appreciate that. And Karen, your experience and your knowledge is amazing. What's one thing, if you could think of one thing that you witnessed as the best practice, or that you did as a best practice, that someone could take away today and say, I could try that at my organization, or I'm going to share this with a colleague of mine. Something that you think really worked really well, best practice, pragmatic best practice that you read about, you witnessed, or you did. What's that one best practice or that tip or advice that you can give this to someone?
Absolutely. So number one, I'm glad this is recorded, because what you just said about working with people, that's it. There you go. There you go. That's the best practice. The best practice I've seen is exactly what you just explained. It is about the people. So it is getting people together that have different perspectives. That is the best practice. It is building those connections, because again, that's where innovation comes from. That's where new ideas, things we hadn't thought about, things we hadn't tried before, comes from. Getting somebody in who doesn't think exactly the same way that I think is going to help me open my mind to something I hadn't tried before. And maybe this is going to yield a better outcome, right? And so exactly what you explained is forgetting the business part, but it's all about the people making connection. The best practice is encouraging people to get to know one another, to work together, and to embrace and really look at those differences. So here's one great example that I'm going to use. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Readiness Institute, but they did something that I use as examples. And just, again, for your audience, I teach and speak, and I do this in lots of different spaces and places throughout the country. And so the Readiness Institute is my go-to for this example, in that strategically, when you brought students together, you deliberately brought students together from different backgrounds and said, learn to partner. Mm-hmm. And what happened was design thinking. What happened was new ideas, right? And students learning, this is how I partner. And these are things that I've come up with that weren't necessarily there before, that we wouldn't have come up with had we not been together as a collective. And quite literally, what is done through the Readiness Institute is an example that I give when speaking at other institutions and speaking with others in this field, because you deliberately bring people together who aren't the same so that they can learn that varied perspective and benefit from it. And it is strategic. It's not like, hey, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. You do this deliberately, you plan it out, and the outcome is so deeply meaningful. So you didn't know that was my best practice. And so surprise, Justin, I've been using the Readiness Institute as an example in lots of spaces and places when I present, because that is a best practice that has such deeply meaningful impact, is always a go-to.
Oh, thank you, Karen, for that. I appreciate it. It's like you said, it's intentional, right? It's not just wishing and hoping. It's actually creating an action plan with intentional, focused outcomes and so forth. So I appreciate that. Karen, our last question is actually by one of our listeners who submitted this question ahead of time on our website. I think it's a great question. I think we all think about this and question it. They said, is it hard to get people to talk about their personal experiences with you? And how do you overcome this? So again, is it hard to get people to talk about their personal experiences with you? And how do you overcome this?
That is a really, really great question. So I'm so excited that it was submitted. Use yourself as an example. So even in starting this out, I chose to, and I want to preface, only do this in a way you feel comfortable. So don't ever disclose something that you feel uncomfortable or that is private or you're currently working through that you're like, I don't know if I want to share that. If you get that kind of check of, I don't know if I want to share that, don't share it, right? Yeah. But I started off sharing things about myself, that I was a terrible student and hated school, that I am a parent of a person with a disability. These are identities and things about me that matter. When people disclose and demonstrate vulnerability, it yields trust. And when we want to present that perfect image, it yields just the opposite, because most people will think, well, I'm not perfect, so Justin may have been that straight A student, but
I wasn't.
Well, we're the same in that. Cool.
Just for the record.
Yeah, I wasn't either. And so it has a different outcome, right? When you share that, when you say, I wasn't that straight A student, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, I'm in a space of learning, and this is how. That is the best way to yield trust, is when you
want to get people to think about that old me too.
Exactly.
Me too. I was that. And then you kind of get to that point where you're knocking down their walls, your own walls, to allow them to, permission or whatever to knock down, or confidence to knock down their walls. So you're, seen as partners or equals in that situation.
Yeah, that's exactly. And you are, right? From a human to human perspective, aren't we all equals? Right. And so sharing things about yourself that aren't perfect is a great example of that, right?
I like that.
We're all human, we're all learning, we're all growing, and or strengths. So I say this to say, I see it as a strength that my son is a person with a disability. That is not something he can change. And he takes that and uses it as advocacy. That's really great. I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but you can take a different position, right? You can look and say, how do I take this circumstance and build it as a strength? Or how do you demonstrate vulnerability, right? And so again, I always say, share those things you're comfortable with. So I would not share that my son is a person with a disability if he wasn't public facing, sharing that he's a person with a disability. I wouldn't expose him like that. That wouldn't be fair, but he's very public facing. So there you go. So I share that. So be okay to be vulnerable, but just make sure you're not exposing somebody else who doesn't want you sharing that information. And don't be afraid to demonstrate you're not perfect, because nobody's perfect.
I like that.
That's just it.
That's a great answer to a great question. Karen, I want to thank you for your time, your expertise today. I want to thank everyone listening today or watching today. I also want to give a special thanks to the Readiness Institute of Penn State's project manager, Miss Emma Hance, on the call right now for setting this all up. I appreciate that and her expertise at the Readiness Institute as an educational leader. And we're just going to give a couple seconds here. If anybody wants to drop a question in the Q&A or chat, we can answer your questions at this time. So we'll give you a couple seconds. And as you're thinking about that question, Karen, I want to thank you so much. I've listened to your webinars and our conversations and everything. And just keep moving forward is my thing. Just keep going, keep educating people. This is a topic that people should never, ever close their ears to and say, I get it. I understand it. So thank you for making me better, making the university, making everyone better you come in contact with. I truly mean that. So from the bottom of our hearts at the Readiness Institute, thank you so much for being our guest. And I did not see any things in the chat here. So I am going to go ahead and again, thank everyone for participating today. And special thanks to Karen, Emma, all the listeners, and everybody who will be watching this in the future. Thank you so much. And if you want to learn more about the Readiness Institute and the programs that we have at the Readiness Institute of Penn State, such as our Rising High School Senior Summer Program, our 9th through 12th grade high school Cuban AI Boot Camp on Artificial Intelligence and other programs, please visit our website at readinessinstitute.psu.edu.